and she got her academic training from the London School of Economics. And she transformed not only the discipline of demography and international social policy, she also influenced government policy in this direction. She's a person with unique skill sets in administration and academics, and she holds a very vast portfolio comprising key positions like Executive of the Faculty of Social Sciences of the University of Southampton. He is also the Director of UK Economic Social Research Council for Center for Population Change. She is President of the European Association of Population Sciences. Also, she is Executive Director of the India Center for Inclusive Growth and Sustainable Development. Professor Jain has been associated with the government of Kerala since a long time in the FLAG program in the Department of Higher Education, and also she is associated with many important workers from Kerala like Professor Hriday Rajan and Professor Mishra from the Center for Development Studies. She is also closely associated with Professor Shiva Raju of the Tata Institute of Social Sciences and also the renowned demographer.
I can't load my slides. Can you load my slides for me? Okay, thank you.
And she's also a fellow of Royal Academy. We have also in the panel Professor ATHINA VLACHANTONI, who is an expert in gerontology and a global aging. Professor VLACHANTONI had her PhD from social policy from the London School of Economics. She had her master's from the University of Oxford. She did her graduation from the University of London. She is currently a member of Global Business Care Network and also the member of UK ESR Peer Review College. And she is heading currently the Department of Gerontology and Social Policy, University of Southampton. We're so happy to have you both in the panel, and also we are happy to have Professor Sadhu Padmadas, Professor of Demography at the University of Southampton. We are discussing a very key topic as far as Kerala is concerned. We are having a very great number, very high aged population in the state. It is almost equaling the age of child population, and also we are facing the prospect of rising the population of the aged. Let me welcome to this panel discussion. Jane, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I am very honoured to be with you today. First of all, I must apologise for our late start. I'm very sorry. I've had some technical difficulties and so had to very quickly change my computer. And I just want to thank Professor Padmadas, who's going to do my slides for me, because I am unable to open my slides. But I first of all just wanted to really provide an introduction to global aging and to give you an overview of where we are currently. I wanted to start with some quotes from some key policymakers. And I think this first quote from Klaus Schwab at the World Economic Forum sums up really quite well where we are. So if policymakers and leaders fail to plan adequately for the changes ahead, they will be inundated by the effects of global aging, such as a dearth of workers, strained pension systems, and overburdened healthcare systems. But, and I think this is a very important but, the good news is if we act now in a creative and proactive manner, we'll have the greatest chance of realising the potential benefits of the ageing trend, utilising the immense social capital of older people while avoiding its perils. And I think this view, which is both looking at the pessimistic side, but also the optimistic side of population ageing, is critically important. I think it's also very relevant to bear in mind the wise words of Ban Ki-moon, who said, if we're aiming towards a society for all ages, then this really emphasises the need to treat older people as both agents and beneficiaries of development. And I think very often when we're talking about population ageing, we tend to think of it as a problem, and we overlook the fact that older people themselves are actually a huge contributor to society and the economy. So let me just give you a brief overview of where we are now. So these are from the latest United Nations population estimates published in July last year. And you can see that 13.5% of the world's population is aged over 60. And this is equivalent to just over 1 billion people. And the population aged 60 and over is the fastest growing age group of all of the world's population. Critically important, around 2% of the world's population is aged 80 and over. And this is the age group that really needs the most in terms of health and social care support. And this is equivalent to 143 million people. Next slide. So, of course, those are the averages for the globe, and there are significant differences across the globe. So if we look at the proportions aged 60 or over, or 80 and over in the blue, in the brackets, then you can see that in the more developed regions of the world, those aged 60 and over already comprise over a quarter of the population. Whereas if we turn to the least developed regions of the world, they only comprise around 6%. However, if we look at absolute numbers, you can see that there are more people aged 60 and over living in the less developed regions of the world than there are in the more developed regions of the world. And we've already got 78 million people aged 80 and over living in the less developed regions of the world. So aging really is a global issue. Next slide. And this graph just shows you the distribution across the globe at the moment. So at the moment, India is in the green zone with less than 10% of its population aged 60 and over. But very rapidly, this will change. Next slide. So looking forward, by 2045, for the first time in human history, the number of older people will exceed the number of children. And by 2050, there'll be over 2 billion people aged 60 and over, with the proportions being nearly 1 in 5 in the less developed regions of the world. And the older population is increasingly concentrated in those areas of the world. Next slide. So here you can see that by 2050, there'll be around 20% of the population of India will be aged over 60. So turning now to how do populations grow old? I always say to my students, it's very nice to be a demographer. It's very simple. There are just 3 things we need to understand: changes in mortality, fertility, and migration. But of course, it's not simple. Understanding what influences mortality or fertility and migration is quite complicated. Now, when we think about population aging, we might think that mortality is the most important factor. I'll come to that in a moment. But first of all, let's think about fertility and how fertility influences the age structure of the population. Falling fertility means fewer babies, fewer young people in the population, and thus a higher proportion of the population who are elderly. So the level of fertility determines the number of people who are entering into the population at its base. Now, one way to illustrate this is by using population pyramids. And this is a population pyramid of England and Wales. And I'm just going to play through. You can see this is for 1961. And you can see the shape of the population. And you can see the baby boom following the Second World War and the baby boom following the First World War. And if we move forward in time, hopefully that will do that. So it's just at the bottom of the slide. Yes, that one there. It's saying that it's not going to work because it's moved from my computer to Professor Padmadas's. Okay, never mind. We'll move on to the next slide. But basically, the number of children entering into the base of the population gradually moves through as they become old. And these are the age pyramids for Europe in 1950, and then in 2000, 2050, and 2010. And you can see that the change in the shape of the pyramid, we've moved from a pyramid to a beehive and then to a rectangle. Now, fertility is falling in every area of the globe. Next slide, Sabu. And you can see that fertility is declining everywhere. So in 1960, the average total fertility in the globe was 5 children per woman. Today, it's just 2.4 children per woman. And by 2050, it will probably be even lower than that 2.2 that is estimated there. Next slide. So this is changing the shape of all the populations around the globe. So you can see these are the age pyramids for Asia over the 150-year period, looking back and then looking forward. These are for Africa. I think I should just flag up here, as well as the changing shape of the age structure, there's also a change in the size of the population over time. And you can see the population of Africa is set to increase quite rapidly across the rest of this century. And finally, we come to China. And I'll come back to China in a moment. But China is a very interesting country, not least because of its one-child policy, which has reduced the number of children entering into the population, which has resulted in a very rapid aging of the population. Next slide. So what about the role of mortality? What role does mortality play in population aging? Well, initially, actually, a decline in mortality can actually make a population younger, because the first mortality to improve is actually infant mortality, which means more children survive. But as we go through, reduced mortality generally affects all age groups and increases the number of young as well as old. Lower mortality leads to a higher average age of death, but the average age of a population is not the age. The average age of the population is the average age of living people, not their average age of death. However, reductions in mortality at very old ages can cause aging from the apex of the population pyramid. Next slide. So, we have seen quite dramatic changes in old age mortality over the last couple of decades. And it's not often that demography reaches the front cover of Time magazine or National Geographic. But in the last 2 to 3 years, the idea that we will start to live into our hundreds has started to gather pace. Will we live to be 120 or even 142? The evidence that is coming out now is starting to suggest that we are seeing really quite dramatic changes. So this graph is quite complicated. Let me just explain it to you. So it shows the remaining years of life beyond age 65 across the time period 1840 through to current day. And basically, a colleague from the Max Planck Institute of Demographic Research in Germany plotted the best performing country in the world using historical data. And because they were writing this paper and they were based in Germany and they were living in the Netherlands, they also plotted those two countries. But I think that the main thing to take away from this chart is that over the last 150 years, we've seen quite considerable improvements in remaining years of life expectancy beyond age 65. So if you make it to 65, you're going to live now, currently, and probably another 20, 22 years. But more importantly, for the statisticians or the mathematicians amongst you, I just ask you, what shape is that graph? If we were to fit a line through it, well, it's an exponential graph. So if we actually were using the past to predict the future, we can see that we're just going to keep improving life expectancy. So let me just give you an example of how the changes in life expectancy in the UK have played out. So this graph shows you the age schedule of mortality. A bit complicated, but let me just say, perhaps we need to start rethinking what we mean by old age. So maybe we say we start becoming old when there's a 1% chance of dying, and then we become very old when there's a 10% chance of dying. So I've plotted the age schedule of mortality and then drawn a line where the 1% and the 10% probability of dying occurs. It might be simpler if we go to the next slide, where it shows it in a table. And basically, for a man in 1951, there was a 1% chance of dying at age 50. But this had changed to age 62 by 2011. And for women, the numbers in 1951 were 56, but by 2011, it was 67. So we really can say that 60 is the new 50, or indeed 62 is the new 50, and 84 is the new 75. So we've got a change in the meaning of old age and when we become old. What does this mean? Next slide. Well, colleagues have been looking at the age at which at least 50% of a birth cohort is still alive. So this is showing you by birth year what age 50% of a birth cohort could be alive. So, for example, taking Sabu's daughter, born in the Netherlands, I believe, around 2000, 50% of her cohort will live to be 100. Wow. So when I show this table to my undergraduates, a lot of them take a deep breath and think, gosh, do I really want to live to be 100? Well, actually, probably half of you are going to live to be 100. So what does that mean in terms of how we organise our life course? Next slide. So I think one of the challenges of global ageing is we're probably going to live very different lives to our parents and our grandparents, and our children are going to live very different lives to us. So how long should we work? Should we be retiring at 50, 60, 70? Maybe we can have a second career. How long should we study? Should we actually have lifelong studying? Because actually, for the careers of the future, we may not have had the right, we may not have the skills. We may need to reskill. And of course, what does it mean for caring and juggling care of children and older parents? All of these things are critical areas where we need to think through carefully how the life course is changing and how it impacts upon policies and practice. Next slide. So one of the key areas of concern around population ageing, of course, is that there are fewer children and fewer workers for more older people. And this graph shows you the old age dependency ratio in the 10 most populous countries of the world. So that's the ratio of those people aged 20 to 64 divided by those aged 65. So today there's around 6.1 workers. We might define them as workers, although obviously the age at which we work is changing. For older person, by 2050 this would have fallen to 3.5, and in some countries in the world you can see it's even more extreme. So if you look at Japan, Japan is going to have almost one person aged 20 to 64 per one person aged 65 and over. And it's concern over dependency ratios that causes lots of policy discussions. In China, the one-child policy has meant that one child can have 2 parents and 4 grandparents, and maybe even 8 great-grandparents to take care of. And there are real discussions in China at the moment about how one can take care of an aging population. So I've talked about fertility and mortality. What about migration? Well, migration is also really important when we start to think about an aging population. As was said in the introduction, we live in an increasingly globalized world, and many of us now do not live where we were born. So the availability of care and support is not just a function of fertility and the number of children we have, but also changing family structures and migration. Families no longer live together, and many are separated across state borders. and across international borders. And I just want to show you, I don't know if Sabu, this might work as a video. This shows you trends in migration between different countries of the world between 1990 and 2019. So basically you can see there are huge flows of people across the different countries of the world. And this wheel just shows you the flows between different Asian countries to each other. But of course, people are moving all over the globe, which has real implications for social care. Next slide. So turning to India, I just wanted to give you a very brief insight into population aging in India and what will be happening over the next 30 years. So you can see that there is already over 100 million people aged 60 and over. The majority of them are in the blue and the red bars, so aged under 70, but you already have an increasing population aged 75 and over. But by 2050, this will have trebled to over 300 million. And if we go to the next slide, if we look at what's happening with the total population by broad age group, you can see that from this chart, so the blue line is children 0 to 14, the red line is those 15 to 64, and the green line is 65 plus. You can already see that India has peaked in terms of the number of its children, and in terms of its population of working age, this will peak around 2050, 2060. And by 2060, the number of people aged 65 and over will exceed the number who are aged 15 and over. So this means over the next 30 years, India is going to have to adapt its economy and society to take on board the change in its population structure. There will be more older workers, there will be more older consumers, and there will be more older people needing support in terms of health and social care and income support. So what skills do you need for an ageing population? Well, Professor VLACHANTONI is going to talk about these in a little bit more detail, but we're going to need more workers in the health and social care sector, more people working in medicine and health sciences, in social work, but also in understanding family structures, in sociology and in psychology. We're also going to need more people who understand some of the issues that I've just run through. So we will need more demographers, we'll need people who understand actuarial science and finance and risk and social protection. And critically, we'll need more people who can actually help policymakers in terms of evaluating the evidence and evaluating different policy options. So gerontology brings together knowledge and expertise and skills on aging and older people across a range of disciplines. And I'm now going to hand over to Professor VLACHANTONI to talk about this in a little bit more detail. Thank you, Sabu.
Thank you, Jane. I'll just trying to share my screen. Sorry, 1 second. Okay, thank you very much. It's a huge privilege and honor for me as well to be invited. Thank you for the invitation. I'm ATHINA VLACHANTONI. I'm also based in the University of Southampton in the Department of Gerontology, and I've had the privilege of working with Professor FALKINGHAM, Professor Padmadas, and a number of colleagues in India, in Bengaluru, in the TEES, on a number of projects that cover areas of population aging. So I'm really excited to be talking a little bit to you today about the growing importance of gerontology. I couldn't have had a better introduction than Professor Falkingham's very concise summary of why is population aging happening. And what I'd like to talk to you about is the kinds of skills, the areas, both substantive and research methods training, which we work on as researchers, but which we also try to train younger cohorts of gerontologists in. I'd like to start with a definition of gerontology, which is the scientific study of aging at the individual and societal levels. And gerontology is not just about older people and old age. There is a common misconception that we only focus on older people, but we actually focus on change and how change affects humans as they age, but also how those changes impact on families, social institutions, labor markets, and welfare systems. So we're looking in gerontology at relationships between different generations and the interconnections between our older and younger selves. So, for example, some of our research has looked at the predictors of well-being in later life. And in order to do that, we actually focus on a step back on middle age individuals. Now, gerontology, as the slide suggests, is a subject which encompasses insights from a broad range of areas. My background personally is in social policy, but I work with demographers like Professor Falkingham and Professor Padmadas, and my colleagues are trained in a number of areas like anthropology, psychology, statistics, economics. And you do need insights from all of these areas in order to be able to address questions which affect policymaking, not just for older people, but for the broader context in which older people live. So gerontology is essentially interdisciplinary. It cannot just borrow insights from a single discipline. And that's really important. And I'll come back to this point a little bit later. Why should we study gerontology? I've just shown a word map here, a word cloud, which gives you some ideas of the types of areas that we focus on both in our research and in our teaching. The life course, for example, is quite central as a theoretical framework in order to understand how change is happening at different stages of life. We use research methods of a very wide range, from your basic qualitative research methods to quite advanced qualitative methods, and the same for quantitative methods. And it is becoming increasingly clear that the mixed methods approach is really important when you try to address complex policy challenges, such as challenges to do with population aging. We also focus on healthy aging, relationships between different generations and how they support each other. Inequality is very important in our work, and resilience. Resilience is really important because it tells us about the factors which are important for persons to be healthy in more than one ways across the life course, and not just in later life. So what kind of careers could the study of gerontology lead to? The answer is that population aging is affecting all areas of life, as Professor Falkingham has already mentioned. And I've just listed here some areas which the audience today may be familiar with. You may be already working in a government department or a non-governmental organization, or you may be an academic or a researcher yourself. So our graduates go on to develop careers in local and national government, policy-making mechanisms, in the health and social care sector. So very often we have students who already have a job in the health and social care sector, but they are interested in developing their skills specifically to do with older persons. The private sector is becoming a very important destination for graduates because there is a growing market of financial products to do with aging and spending a longer time in retirement. The third sector is also really important. We've had very strong links with Help Age International in different parts of the world. And finally, the academic sector is also a destination in the sense that about 1/3 of our graduates at the master's level go on to study for a doctoral degree. And that's really important because it means that the master's program can then develop the next cohort of gerontologists who are going to be pivotal for policymakers in the next half a century or so. Let me tell you a little bit about our department. So we are an academic department in gerontology, but we also host a Center for Research on Aging. So we are a group of staff who are engaged in research and teaching. And we find that that makes it teaching really interesting, but also it keeps it really updated because we use examples from our real research in order to teach gerontologists. In the last assessment exercise that the government conducts in the UK, we came in the top 5 in the country as part of the Social Policy and Administration group. And we constantly give opportunities to students to engage in research projects in our department and our center. And I'll give you some examples of the kinds of projects that students have worked on a little bit later. We're a relatively small department, certainly by Indian standards. So we have about 60 master students and about 15 doctoral students. But I suppose what that means is that we take care of students quite a lot. So we do offer a very supportive environment, and very importantly, an environment where students can reach out to staff with different disciplinary expertise, so they can develop their own research passion and interests, ranging from management, business, to medicine, psychology, and any aspect of population aging, which is important to study at the global level. I wanted to give you a sense of what our programs include. The first program that we offer is a Master's in Gerontology. We offer that both face-to-face and by distance learning, but the program is exactly the same content, the same external examiner, the same coursework, it's the same degree at the end. We offer examples, modules, for example, Introduction in Gerontology, and opportunities to specialize in areas like aging, health and well-being, or mental health, or poverty and social protection. But what is making our program distinct, I guess, from other gerontology programs is that we place a heavy emphasis on research methods training. And that's because we think that whatever job you do after your master's program in gerontology, you need to have a good understanding of research methods, even if you don't use them yourself, and to be able to critically approach the evidence that comes your way in terms of population aging, so that all advice and recommendations to the government or the non-governmental sector is based on sound evidence from empirical and other types of research. The second program we offer is the Masters in Global Aging and Policy, and this is a program specifically designed for people who are already working either in a government department or in a non-governmental organization. The purpose of this master's is to focus on policy evaluation and really equipping students with the methods and evaluation skills that they need as part of their day-to-day work. It also includes an introduction to the interdisciplinary study of aging, but then it very quickly focuses students on developing skills that they can themselves apply to their work after graduation. How is the distance learning program different? These are a summary of the key differences of the distance learning program compared to the face-to-face program. It is much more flexible in terms of learning, and we have had about 10 years experience of developing an accessible teaching team that responds to student queries and provides a supportive environment. All of the material is available online, which means that time zones do not scare us. We have lots of meetings and teaching online, And we also allow students the opportunity to access the material at any point of the day or night. All of the material is available online. And the focus on quantitative and qualitative research methods training is really strong, even by distance learning. So we have spent a long time, about 6 years, developing training which is approved by the UK's Economic and Social Research Council, that prepares students for doctoral research, whether it is in the UK or somewhere else. What do the students tell us? Here's just a few quotes. I wanted to give you a sense of what it is like to study gerontology, especially by distance learning. And it gives you a good idea of the perspective of the student, who is very often someone who is very busy with family commitments, often working at the same time as studying, and somebody who takes a lot of pride in accessing information from different sources and making the most of that program in order to become better in what they do already as part of their work. Our students come from all over the world, and we have a community that encompasses, as I said, lots of time zones, and that makes it really special because our alumni network can draw from each other in terms of supporting each other in terms of skills, in terms of information about upcoming events and training, but also staying in touch as they develop the skills to become the people who make decisions about older people in the years to come. Now, I'm really pleased about the timing of today's event, because I wanted, before I conclude, to give you information about an opportunity for scholarships that is still open in our department. It ends on the 4th of May, which I think is next week. So we're offering at the moment 20 Commonwealth scholarships from the Commonwealth Scholarships Commission, which are available for either the MSc Gerontology distance learning or the MSc Global Aging and Policy distance learning. It does require 2 separate applications, one to Southampton and one to the Commonwealth Commission, but it does offer students a life-changing opportunity to focus on gerontology or global aging and policy, to develop your skills, to network with people from around the world, and to be taught from a department who is very passionate about working with students from around the world and really developing excellence and skills for the next cohort of gerontologists. Now, I promised I would give you a taste of the kinds of projects that students work on, and this slide gives you some examples. With Professor Padmadas and Professor FALKINGHAM, we've been working together on a number of projects. A good example is Global Aging in Long-Term Care, which was a project bringing together colleagues from different parts of the world, trying to understand common challenges in spite of the country differences in terms of providing quality long-term care for older people across the world. Other projects focus on pension protection, aging and well-being across the world, understanding resilience in later life. I talked about this a little bit earlier. And finally, the impact of migration in China and other parts of the world. We've recently completed work under the leadership of Professor FALKINGHAM, which looks at the impact of economic migration on older persons in India. And that's available. If anybody wants to email me, I'm very happy to share this with you. I think that's all I had to say. Can I just go back to this slide, which includes my email address? Please take it down if you're interested in the scholarships, and I'm very happy to send you more information and guide you through the process. Okay, I think I'm going to stop there, and we're very happy to take questions.
Thank you, Professor Jane FALKINGHAM and Professor ATHINA VLACHANTONI. I mean, I should be saying Jane and ATHINA as we are colleagues, but I'm given this honor to really select a few questions and ask them. I think the first question is actually, thank you very much for those stellar presentations. I think they were really engaging and deep in terms of really giving us an idea of aging that is not just happening in Kerala but across the world. I think this is very, very important. And in the, as you know, both of you have correctly said that no sector is going to be immune. Like well, it'll be like a multi-sectoral effort, skills that we need. So there was a question. I mean, there are a number of questions. I think we have one question here. It starts from the gerontology programs. They ask that, well, whether we will get a certification and after completing this MSc program. I think it's just a question that you can definitely answer.
Yes. Yes, so students who complete the master's program receive a certificate like any master's program in the UK.
Right, thank you. So another question, Jane, for you, I think it's actually a quite challenging question. It says that, well, would it help if the care of elderly rests with is the responsibility of the government rather than their own kin? Because as you've said that, well, that probably the globalized migration world, I think people are left behind. So the question is quite critical from Nandini Prabhu, who asked that whether the care should rest with the government rather than their own kin.
A very, very good question. So I think that my answer is going to be a typical academic answer, and actually say it should rest with both. So I think that certainly in the UK, the government is tasked with care of the elderly. Should it have to take care of all of them, the social care system would collapse. And actually the vast majority of care is still provided by partners and by adult children and by neighbours. And I think we will never be able to get away from that. And in fact, many older people, that's their preference. Their preference is to remain living in their own homes, and living with their neighbours and their family members. But of course, there are situations where once older people are not able to continue to take care of their daily needs, particularly in terms of being able to cook for themselves or being able to get dressed for themselves and wash, then we need to think about how we take care of them and how we support the carers as well. Because we need to be aware that actually family members are under stress. And we've done research looking at how informal caring, particularly amongst people in their 50s and 60s who are caring for their parents now more and more, that then impacts upon their ability to continue to work. And actually, we need people in their 50s with their skill sets to still be in the labour market. And so government needs to support not only the older people, but also the informal carers too. So yes, the government needs to take up a bigger share.
Thank you, Jane. There's another question that now the global economy is actually, destroying, and it's having a significant impact on all population, particularly older population. And how do we overcome this? This is the theme.
That's a very good question. As we all sit at home in lockdown, I think we are all thinking about this. The best scientific minds in the world are thinking right now about how do we get out of this situation that we are in with COVID-19 and how we return back to the economy, how we restart the economy and we kickstart it. I think there's probably never been a better time to be a demographer or a public health or an epidemiologist. I think the only way out of this is going to actually to go back to basics and to get testing and tracing and quarantining and start with securing the health and the security, the safety of our populations, and then we'll be able to get back to work. So one of the things we're thinking about at the University of Southampton right now is whether we actually start to test our staff and students ourselves. So if we had weekly testing and then we knew which members of staff and which students were ill and we were able to support them in quarantining, then we would be able to start mixing with each other and getting back to work. But it's a problem that everybody, just read the newspapers, we're all thinking about it right now.
Thank you, Jane. Professor Athina, a question to you. Can people from arts background apply for MSc Gerontology program?
Answer is yes. The application asks you to write a personal statement, and in there we would expect to see how you feel that your background fits in with the study of gerontology. The minimum threshold is equivalent of an upper second class degree, but the background of our students is a really wide ranging. It tends to be in social sciences, but we also have medical sciences and arts and humanities, law, management, business. So, yes.
Thank you. Professor Jane, here is another question from Indira Mani, very interesting question on Kerala. What is the impact of aging population on the state of Kerala, which mainly depends on tourism and agriculture for its economy? So it's predominantly a tourism and financial sector as well, but I think, again, that's a very interesting question.
Yeah, thank you very much. And actually, Kerala is actually one of the states of India which has a more aged age structure, partly to do with your successes in terms of improving life expectancy and also bringing down fertility. So the tourist sector, well, actually, I will come back to thinking about the life course and when people need to retire. So first of all, as clients of the tourist sector, there will be huge numbers of older people wishing to visit Kerala. And I think you need to think through how you make provision for those groups. You may need to think about more accessible, making some of the hotels and also some of the sites more accessible to people who might have walking difficulties and mobility difficulties. WHO is doing a lot of work around age-friendly cities and age-friendly communities. So it's thinking through how people who want to come to Kerala can move around it and enjoy it, but then also your workforce. You will have more older workers in Kerala, but they'll be bringing their skills and expertise, and I don't see any problems for that. Agriculture, then you might need to, you need a level of physical fitness for agriculture. But again, technology is changing very rapidly. And so maybe introducing more technology-driven solutions into your agricultural sector will help you overcome that. Absolutely. Those are some immediate thoughts.
Excellent. So that leads to another very interesting question. I think I really love this question. This is from Chitra Nair. How digital language brokering will help in managing intergenerational ties in this digital era?
Yes. Well, I think we're all practicing it right now, aren't we? So my 85-year-old mother is in lockdown in a separate town from me and from her grandchildren. And one of her grandchildren last night was talking her through how to set up Skype, so she could actually stay in touch and communicate. And I think increasingly we will be using more and more IT solutions. We will actually get more IT-enabled homes, which can also protect us. So you can have digital alarms. If an older person wants to fall, you can press a button and they'll ring the phone of a neighbour or a friend. We can also think longer term about having our fridges digitally enabled. They can start ordering our shopping for us, make sure our milk has not gone off, etc. I think we're right on the cusp of a real revolution.
Thank you. There was actually a question from Basila who asked about the difference between AGING and AGEING is the former is an American spelling and the other one is latter is a British spelling. Athina, there is a question for you. What is the qualification for MSc in gerontology? BSc, we don't have a BSc program in gerontology. And does Southampton University provide a distant diploma course in gerontology related subjects? I think probably I think yeah, it's just a simple question. We can't hear you.
Athena, you must be on mute.
Mute, yeah.
Shall I answer the question?
Yes, please. Yes, please.
Okay, so yes, so there is no BSc in gerontology in the UK either. You come through a different discipline to gerontology. Most people come from a range of social science, arts, and health sciences backgrounds. So absolutely no need to have studied gerontology at undergraduate level. You could have studied economics, or you could have studied psychology or management science or business. That's not a problem. What was the second question, Kevin?
No. I think that's the question. So I think we have answered. I think.
Okay.
There is actually a question which is actually critical, time critical. Is actually COVID-19 has taken lots of lives of older people. So that there will be a decline in the number of old age people. How will this affect the world? I think that's an interesting one. I hope perhaps I could quickly share I think the screen perhaps show. I mean, no, probably no. It's I think let's.
No, so you're absolutely right. The most at risk group in terms of deaths at the moment is those aged 80 and over. However, every death is a tragedy for the family involved, and every death is something very sad. But actually, in terms of the proportion of older people who have, I don't think the level of mortality is high enough to actually change the age structures of populations. So we're talking currently, I think globally there's been 200,000 deaths from COVID-19, probably 150,000 of those will have been of older people. But we're talking about an older population of about 1 billion. So it's essential that we understand the challenge of COVID-19. COVID-19 is not going to change the underlying age structures of populations dramatically.
Right. Absolutely, Jane. I think I do completely agree with that. I think that's not going to have any impact on the age structure or the life expectancy, probably. Yeah. But here is, I think we don't have much time left, but probably one or two questions quickly. There are a number of questions. I think we are happy to answer those questions separately. But the question is, if the process of aging continues like this, will this lead to an extinction of human beings in the future?
Very interesting question. So there are some interesting projections about population size published by the United Nations. And so if we had a fall of fertility below replacement level, gradually the population of the world might decline. However, even at the most extreme scenarios, we end this century at around 7 billion, around the same number as we are now. I think it's much more likely that we may shrink, but then I think we will stabilize. Yeah. I don't think we are going to be made extinct, but that's just but I won't be alive at that moment in time anyway. But I think we probably will, we will probably stabilize around 10 billion. And then maybe we might start to decline. I think the challenges of climate change, the challenges of new pandemics, such as the one we're living in now, they are going to be the factors that are going to influence whether humanity continues, how we take care of the world.
Yes, indeed. These questions are all coming through. I think I personally wish that we stay here for long for these questions. But probably if Dr. Jacob, if you may allow me, I think there are two questions. It seems that it's of a very prominent question.
Yes, we can take few questions, but I understand that there's a meeting for Jane.
Yes.
After this, it depends upon her time.
Yes. Is that okay, Jane? I think.
Yes. We were late starting, I'm afraid, due to my technical issues.
Okay. Thank you. Is it okay? So, is there any evidence-based research on the ways to promote autonomy in older people from the family? And what are the tools for measuring social autonomy? It's a very interesting question.
ATHINA, can you get your microphone back? No.
So, is there any kind of evidence-based research on the ways to promote autonomy in older people?
There is a lot of research on how to promote autonomy of older people. I was deferring to Professor VLACHANTONI because she would knows more about this than mine. But there's work by social psychologists on how to do that. We can provide some references, perhaps.
Sure. We have a question from Shalini Sen, who's asking, as life expectancy increase, we also see an increase or change in the disability. The question is that disability, the levels of disability, is that also going to change over time as life expectancy increases?
I'm wondering if it's the number of microphones we have on. If I turn mine off, I think it might come back on.
No, we can't hear it, unfortunately.
We can't hear. Okay. So yes, there is some evidence that as we add more years to life, we are adding years of good health, but we're also adding years of not so good health. So we're pushing up the age at which disability begins, but it's we haven't found a way yet to stop disability. Make sense?
That makes sense, absolutely. So I think that also answers the question about should morbidity be included as one of the components of aging along with fertility. And, in fact, that was really... I think, due to the lack of time, I think perhaps we should stop here. And because, thank you for all those questions. I now hand this over to Dr. Jacob. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Jane, and thank you, Professor VLACHANTONI, for all those projections, all those pyramids that you showed us. It makes us scary, bit thinking about 2050, about the projections that you have given, especially for a state like Kerala. We are focusing on skill development. We are making projections, demand projections on the futuristic job roles, especially based on the Industry 4.0. So this makes us more aware that we should be considering this as well. We should be considering the issue of aging as well when we think about the future job roles. Definitely need your assistance in this particular issue. We'll come back to you. But I have to tell you that the state government of Kerala is the first state in the country to form a policy framework for the aged population. We have got in the state a very good palliative care program, thanks to Professor Rajagopalan, who is a pioneer in this area, taking care of all those things. And we have also amended the Senior Citizens Act. So the state is very much aware of all these things. And also, during the COVID times, the public health system of the state has emerged more strong, and it is showing signs of resilience like never before. And we hope that such projections will also be taken care of. From a skill development perspective, let me ask you a very important last question. Now, taking into account this growing numbers in the aged population, would you suggest one area where we should be focusing when you think about futuristic skills?
One area?
In the area of futuristic skills, we are thinking about futuristic skills like AI, data science. So would you think that we should be looking at another area also, especially as far as the aged population is concerned?
I think all of those areas are really important, but then you also need to be thinking about accessibility of those areas and acceptability. So, for example, accessibility of digital technologies, and also acceptability, particularly in areas of robotics, robotic care, for example. It's not necessarily a new skill set, but it's looking at it through the lens of older users.
Okay. So you mean to say that these services should be more accessible to the older population?
Yes, and if you're thinking about digital solutions for services, then you need to be looking at them through the lens of the older user. So engaging older users or older stakeholders in the design of services and design of technology.
Right. I think I'd like to just add to that very important point of the design. I think that design is going to be fundamental in almost all sectors, particularly, even that includes infrastructure, design of buildings. So civil engineers, mechanical engineers, electrical engineers, electronics engineers, and from there to really healthcare technologists who need to really reflect on these challenges. So that design is going to be very crucial. I would also like to add one more point, I think, which Jane used to really say this very often, is that aging. There was also a question that I think the question is from Kevin. It says that why do most people oppose the concept of aging as a disease? So in fact, aging is not a disease, or aging is not a challenge or a threat, but it is actually a wonderful opportunity for humanity. And in fact, I think, as Professor Jane Falkingham mentioned, that real career probably starts after age 50. So after age 50, there is a new prospect for a career. So this should really please many people, including I'm almost reaching there.
So thank you, Professor, for telling us that when it comes to future technologies, they should be more inclusive. They should more cater to the senior citizens. So we come to the end of the very important webinar session. Thank you so much. We are very fortunate to have such a distinguished panel with members having global expertise in this particular area. It was amazing to see all those projections in this very short session. Thank you, Professor Jane. Thank you, VLACHANTONI. And a big thanks to Professor Sabu Padmadas for facilitating that Q&A session. He has got the rare advantage of knowing both the systems. So that is why he handled the session very well. So thanks to all, and also thanks to the participants. We had a record number of participants. At one point of time, we had nearly 530 people logging on to the session. That was a record. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
All the participants, thanks and bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.